All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Crypto with English. So today's episode is going to center around these 4 topics, which are viewed as both values and taboos simultaneously. So we're talking about love, sex, robots, and the metaverse. Now, we are currently in a technological renaissance or revolution. We're effectively decentralizing our society forward towards progress, but for every step in progress, the inverse will occur. There are going to be problems. So when it comes to automation, AI, the metaverse, as great as those things are, these are going to change relationships between people, especially when it comes to things like intimacy, romance, love, and sex. And whatever, let's say, advances or good things that may come out of that, rightfully so, or I guess logically so, rather, bad things will also occur as well, such as sexual harassment, and especially between Me Too and the various public scandals coming out of the United States over the past few years. We really have to wonder, how are these problems going to translate and manifest themselves into something like the metaverse? Now, if you go around the internet and you look at comments, this may sound a little ridiculous to some people, but in fact, it's actually not. If you have a virtual likeness of yourself, man or woman, and somebody is, let's say, disrespecting and violating, any type of self-respect, self-esteem, privacy, and decency, that will cause some serious problems. So I want to introduce a very, very special guest. I am particularly excited about this episode because this really treads into some dangerous waters when talking about blockchain and talking about the metaverse and talking about AR and VR. These are not really the most popular as far as most comfortable topics to talk about. It's there. It's in, I think, the frame of mind of a lot of people, but it's not exactly a topic that people easily lead with when they're talking about tech news and blockchain news and stuff like that. So I want to introduce today Bobbi Bidochka. Now, she is a Renaissance woman, and I don't say this lightly. She does many things. She's known as the friendly feminist. She's the co-chair of the academic conference on love and sex with robots. She's a sex-positive advocate who authored the book Sexual Intelligence in Business. And by the way, it's on Amazon. I would highly suggest anybody to check it out. She's a venture capital associate at Tandem Launch Inc. She's the founder of Imagine Ideation, which specializes in connected experiences and ecosystem diplomacy, which is also very relevant to what we're going to dive into today as well. And also, she is a tech enthusiast. Now, tech enthusiast is also not a term that I throw around lightly as well. This is somebody with a lot of experience and a lot of depth of knowledge in these areas, in this subject matter that we're going to talk about. So currently her focus is developing a training program to really reduce sexual harassment in the workplace and business without really compromising opportunities and relationships. And I think, when it comes to sexual harassment, there are many issues as far as rank, title, power, and people who feel stuck, I would imagine. I think there's many parties who may end up being victims to this, thinking to themselves like, okay, I have career opportunities, family, and other responsibilities on the line. And I think maybe some of these things are compounded, and some of these things, unfortunately, may follow into the metaverse. So anyway, we're going to deep dive into all of this today. Bobbi, thank you so much for coming on to the show today.
My pleasure, Adam. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction.
Oh, anytime. Well, to be honest, you've certainly done a lot, and these are going to be some very, very interesting points and subject matter issues we're going to go into. So what made you get into this area? Not even just get into this area, but advocate in this area. This is not exactly the most comfortable subject matter within blockchain or tech or decentralization or Web3 that people go into. In fact, virtually nobody leads with this, so to say. So yeah. What made you decide to make this much of your focus?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been comfortable with sex and sex topics. I mean, even into my teenage years, that it's just something I've always been comfortable with. So there's that. But the rest of it, I kind of stumbled into it in a way. I started doing research for the book, And in doing so, not only becoming informed and super, jazzed about what I was learning, but there's a lot of potential for growth. Human behavior is also super interesting. I think that, love and sex are the strongest human drivers of motivation. I could argue against anybody who would say otherwise. I'll always link it back to that. So that's why I lead with it, because I think everybody does too, in a way, just not explicitly. So, just trying to like carve that path, I guess, that forward to make people realize that sex, there's more than just what's going on in the bedroom. It comes with you throughout your day, in your life, and it manifests in all different kinds of ways.
Right. And distinguishing between males and females here, how does that manifest in the way, let's say, a man interacts with the world, as far as, I guess, reaching for opportunities, reaching for status? And I'd also address that as far as women. How does that play into, let's say, the woman's psyche, as far as confidence, let's say, as reaching for opportunities, essentially moving forward and upwardly moving in status and things like that? Like, I would imagine, let's say, going off of what you said, sex is beyond just, let's say, an act, a series of acts, or a relationship. Really, these are things that really are kind of hardwired into self-esteem, and I think maybe the way we view ourselves, so to say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would stray away from, the male-female binary.
Okay.
This is a lot of fluidity there with people, and also within each identity. Not every male is super wants to be the CEO or something. Right. There's a lot of really great guys that are perfectly happy and desire to be a stay-at-home dad, and same with women. So within each sort of gender identity, there's all sorts of variability. Right. But I think in the context of what we're really trying to get at here is the sexual harassment stuff, right. And the dynamics and the power dynamics there. These are kind of socially constructed notions. We're sort of raised in certain ways. So depending on where you were raised and who you're raised by, but generally speaking, women are raised to act like this. Women should be nice, sure. And respectful and all of this. And, men are to be like that, just be strong and confident and all that. So, after years and years and years of programming, people tend to internalize those notions and sort of perform and act them out. And so that's kind of where we're at in the situation of like the nature-nurture debate. There's certain things right. that you have genetic dispositions to, and other things that are just, come from your environment, social construction. So where we're at now, say in the West, I can only speak really in the context of the West, because that's where the majority of the sexual harassment cases, not that there's not sexual harassment and violence in other contexts, but, right. Men have been in, the ruling power, the dominant positions for most of the time. And so women are, sort of trying to get right. some place up there, make some room for themselves there, along with, other different identities as well, being recognized and acknowledged. But like anything else, when there's a power dynamic, it's not so easily given up, right? And so, right. people in power, let's just take white men as an example. When you ask an individual white man, do you agree women should advance? Do you agree diversity? If you ask each individual person, yes, of course, yes, I believe that, for the most part. But the system, the patriarchal system is set up so that, except that I'm not going to, give up my piece of the pie for you, right? And right. so it's kind of like if a homeless person comes knocking on your door and says, I'm homeless, you have a great house, you've got an extra bedroom, why don't you let me sleep there? Yeah, no, close the door, right? So it's like, it's not that people don't empathize with homelessness. It's just that right. only up until I'm not going to give my house to you. Right. And so I will maybe donate a little bit to help you get there, but I'm not fully going to just release all of my stuff so that you can have it. It's just a power dynamic. It's politics. This is human behavior. Right. In this sort of model of there's not enough for everyone. And so we have to fight for that. Now, is
Right.
that model actually true? We're not quite sure because we have not actually experienced what that might be like when everybody can have a piece of the pie.
Right. Yeah, and we're I guess still moving towards a society that is more equitable and at least provides ease of access and ease of mobility for other people to participate, other people to manage, and perhaps also for other people of different backgrounds to have an ownership in industry, so to say. And
Yeah.
let's say for example, you know, talking about, let's say, patriarchy, and let's say it's been traditional white and male dominated, throughout most of the history of the West. And although that's slowly changing now, I guess you can't, let's say, reverse, let's say, 500 plus years of, let's say, institutions that have, let's say, been built on this. So my question would be, is this more of a nature or nurture thing? Is this more of a subconscious or subconscious or conscious thing? So for instance, when I say subconscious, is this subconscious? Is this more of like a human tribalism type of thing? People wanting to surround themselves with like individuals, feeling more secure, so to say, almost like maybe how people were in prehistory, as far as like an up and coming village or a tribe or things like that. Or is it kind of more of a conscious thing where, let's say, men are like, okay, lost territory is forever lost. So it's kind of like, okay, if we just start making concessions here, these are essentially going to be things that are never coming back, so to say.
Yeah, I mean, so one thinks, right? So I mean,
Right.
Borders since 1945 haven't been forever, and they won't be forever, right? So
Right.
have been flexing, throughout time, anyways. But it's both. So there's a lot
Okay.
of human beings do have a strong impetus for community, right? So we're social
Right.
creatures, and we want community. But what tends to happen with community and with humans is we also, in order for us to sort of make sense of the world, I have to know, well, who am I? And
Sure.
who is Bobbi? Bobbi does this, and Bobbi does that, and Bobbi thinks this, and Bobbi thinks that. And for the people that don't think this and don't think that, well, they're not part of my group. This is the othering, right?
Right.
And that's when conflict starts to happen, when people are resistant to difference. And then you have, what's going on in the US right now with a lot of social division, which
Right.
then converts into political division, when different people think different things and there's no space for we can all be right in our own way,
Right.
when it comes to power and money and resources. So that's the thing. It's not just about what we think and what we do. It's how power and resources come along with that.
Right.
And so there's definitely, it's both things. So it's what we've been socialized to do. And, it's been going on for a lot longer than 500 years. But what I can tell you is that even if it was just 500 years, that's still hard to undo. We have a system, right? We have just like we have a system that's capitalist, right? But we didn't always have a capitalist system. We had other things in the past. And so there needs to be a system, and it literally was like, it evolved into that. It needs to devolve. And same with patriarchy.
Right.
So we need to devolve that somehow, but we need something to replace it with. And this is like an ongoing debate. What would it look like? Like literally, what it look like?
Right. Yeah. And, in the scope of history as well, democracy, is both new and not new at the same time too. So, let's say if we talk about the Greeks and maybe the early Roman Republic, we had, I guess you could say, a semblance or the beginnings of it. We've also had it now here in the West, particularly like North America, like, the United States and Canada, so to say. But it is grossly imperfect, to say the least. There are many areas that need to be addressed. And going off that, what were the, I guess you could say, the moments or series of moments that made you or inspired you to write the book, Love and Sex with Robots?
Okay, so
I'm sorry.
No, yeah.
My apologies. I switched that up. Sexual Intelligence in Business. My apologies. I misspoke.
No, it's all good because the conference is based on David's book as well.
Right.
So I wrote it because I was, trying to start my own business and, do a bunch of things. And after Me Too happened, which was, super important, and it had a lot of really important effects on policy and raising awareness. But there was sort of like what I call a second order consequence. So the environment, the business environment, the work environment became a bit touchy. Everyone's walking on eggshells, like nobody knows what to say, what to do. And in a world where most of the power is held by men, and I need male mentors, I need male connections, but if we can't build a relationship, if we can't go for dinner, we can't go for drinks, we can't do stuff together, you know, it just got a little bit crazy. Like there was some companies, they completely canceled their Christmas party because one person got too drunk and made a move or did something stupid. Or they made new policies, like if a man and a woman are traveling to a conference, they can't go in the same car together alone. They can't sit beside each other on the airplane alone. They can't have hotel rooms on the same floor. As if that's like, if they really want to fuck, like they're gonna fuck.
If it's gonna happen, regardless of what floor it is.
So it just got really crazy, and I thought this is, and I would talk to individuals, and everyone agreed with me, but nobody wanted to say it because how dare you say something against the Me Too movement? I'm like, but I'm not saying something against the Me Too movement. I'm talking about with an effect that happened, and so I wrote the book to talk about that, to bring that to light, but also to help both men and women realize that you have a sexual energy, you have an erotic energy that comes with you throughout the day, wherever you go, in all of your interactions. And so but you can't shut that down. Like it's impossible. More than 50% of people find lovers, dates, spouses at the workplace and in business. We spend most of our day doing business and at work. And so how do we sort of navigate that environment in a way that doesn't try to sort of neuter everybody or sort of get kind of like, you want to get in front of it. Like, let's figure out how do we do that stuff right and still eliminate and reduce sexual harassment. And so there's things that we can do there, but also like how you should be embracing your sexual energy because it actually will put you gas in the tank. To me, it's 10x my productivity, 10x my creativity. Like there's something there. It's scientifically proven. I got a whole chapter on it.
Awesome. You know, and by the way, those are some incredible points you raised, to say the least. So as far as, you know, walking on eggshells, how do we navigate around that? Because, you know, like you mentioned with the Me Too movement, you know, there certainly was this period of time where both men and women and relationships in the office, people were incredibly cautious, much more cautious than traditionally so, you know. So what would be, I guess you could say, the starting point as far as effectively navigating that in light of all of these scandals, you know, from really every strata of society, and obviously the major ones coming out of the US, so to say?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of education that needs to be had, but the first thing is to understand that all of these dynamics are thrown into one pot, but they actually fall into 3 different buckets. So the first bucket is these people actually might want to interact with each other in sexual and loving ways, even though they're coworkers and whatever. And there's lots of actually industries like in film and arts and the government that actually, and even academia, people like they get together because they're like sort of insular in their group. They date each other. They don't date outside their groups. The other side is the power dynamic. When a proper illegal sexual harassment case or occurrence, this is a power dynamic. It really doesn't have as much to do with sex as people think. It's a power dynamic. It's a way to control and get what you want from people. It's a tool for manipulation. And then there's in the middle where people are just confused about what to say. Like maybe this guy, he's a bit awkward. He likes this girl, doesn't know how to react to her, wants to ask her out. Maybe she doesn't like him, doesn't know what to say. How do I reject him without, you know, making it weird? And then it feels creepy. And then I feel bad and I call him a creep, but really it's because I don't know how to handle the situation. So it's this zone in the middle that we need to, that's why I want to design training that sort of gets people to understand, first of all, how do I differentiate between this is actual sexual harassment and I need to report it, I need to call it out, I need to do something about it, charges, all of that. Over here is these are just normal like relations, sexual like dynamics that are going to happen anyway. And then the
Right.
stuff in the middle that's confusing. And so I want to train people up on how to distinguish between the three, and then get people to acknowledge, to sort of practice out, like, what do I say in this situation, in that situation? And it's sort of like there's some training that needs to be involved there.
Right. And if we're just to talk about, let's say, male and female before we get to the other genders, with what's occurred and all of these scandals now coming to light, so to say, has it effectively created a situation where, let's say, between reasonable and decent men and women, are men in a situation where they feel overly cautious and, let's say, outright scared to, let's say, maybe reciprocate feelings or expressions? And on the flip side, does it create a situation for women where, let's say, they feel kind of alienated, so to say, or neglected, or, you know, perhaps in some shape or form felt some sort of cold shoulder from maybe somebody that would otherwise not express that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the concerns are nearly equal on both sides, with not quite knowing what to say or to do in those situations. I would say for men, there's a portion of them like, listen, I don't know what I'm going to say. I could say something wrong, and so fuck, I'm going to say nothing at all. So they just shut up and they feel very closed off. And that's probably not too good. Then there's, you know, other cohorts of guys that have told me, I have no issue with this because I've never said anything that I'm not supposed to say. I'm totally respectful. I'm not worried about this because, you know, shitty things don't come out of my mouth anyway, so I don't have to worry about it. Hopefully that is, you know, the ones who don't think they have to worry about it, that is actually true. I'm going to probably half of them think that and they're wrong, and half of them think that and they're right. And the ones that are, you know, very concerned about what they want to say versus what they know they shouldn't say, that's where a lot of the learning opportunity is, because there's just some history of, usually that's a little bit of an older generation. They don't understand what's wrong with calling her sweetheart. They don't understand what's wrong with, you know, just telling her she looks good in a skirt. Like, they don't understand what's wrong with that. And that they don't understand that there's probably a right time to say that and a wrong time to say that. They can't tell the difference. It's very, very complex, Adam. It's really, really takes a lot of effort, which is kind of one of my big takeaways from the book. Unfortunately, people, you do have to pay attention. Learn who your audience, who are you talking to, right? Like, for me, it doesn't take more than 30 seconds of talking to me to figure out what I'm okay with and what I'm not, because I also, I make it, my boundaries are very clear. This is something that women need to learn more. They need to learn how to communicate your boundaries and what is acceptable to you and what isn't. And when you make that very clear from the outset, it's sort of like pre-consent. I mean, asking for consent is also important, depending on what you're asking for. But also, how do you receive a negative consent? If you ask, you know, can I tell you look good today? And someone says, no, I'd rather you didn't comment on my appearance. Women need to get comfortable stating that without getting, you know, too pissed about it. And tagging that guy's like, that guy's a forever fucking harasser. No, give him a chance to learn. And then on the other side, people need to figure out how to receive rejection well, in a respectful way. So when we sort of get that sort of, women have to get more confident and more comfortable calling people out, saying what they think in a way that will land well. I'm not saying that women have to be nice about it, but you do have to be respectful. Give them opportunity to learn.
And would it be fair to say, too, there's probably statistical data out there that indicates that probably having an environment where, let's say, just using the two genders for now, men and women working together most likely create a more productive environment versus, let's say, if you just have a, you know, a just male office or a just female office, so to say, or maybe just some sort of hardline policy discouraging or even penalizing interaction between between.
Oh, no, you can't do that. I mean, the science is very clear on diversity,
Right.
not just between men and women, but, you know, age, ethnicity, religion, all of that.
Right.
Diversity breeds great ideas. And the more diverse team you have, the better business you have. This is 100% proven.
Right, because I could imagine, hypothetically speaking, if there is an environment where it's homogenous, where let's say it's mostly or primarily men, or it's mostly primarily just women, even if you were to, let's say, remove some of those, sexual or romantic dynamics, I do feel like you get an echo chamber of ideas. And I think that leads to stagnation after a while. If you just have all the same guys grouped together, they're most likely just going to come up really with the same ideas, and they're most likely going to subconsciously affirm and agree to those ideas. And I think maybe
that's
much
also how you get bias. Like Google,
right? Exactly.
It was 10 years ago. Google was so biased because all the programmers who did a lot of the classification and linkages were guys, and so they didn't realize that when someone says nurse and I'm looking for photos, that there might be some male nurses as well. Just
right.
as an example.
Right, because I guess you could say the stereotypical default mental image that's going to come up is, let's say, going to be the female nurse, as frequently depicted throughout, both my childhood and yours, and those of us who've come before, whether it's in movies or in really any other setting, as being solely, if not primarily, female. So keeping in mind these dynamics, now we throw AI, the metaverse, on top of that. Now, throwing that wrench into the machine, what are the added problems that's going to bring into this situation now regarding sexual harassment and maybe even the stymieing, if not maybe the neutering of relationships, or better yet, creating more hostile relationships, whether it's between male and female and the spectrum of genders, so to say?
Yeah, we are going to be embarking on a real interesting project on how to manage all of that, because if how people act in person and then you take those same people and how they act on social media, Facebook in particular and Twitter, the level of hostility and sort of bravery, like I'm behind my computer so I can say whatever I want.
Right.
It tends to err on the side of negative. People aren't doing as much loving as they are hating and trolling. And so
right.
If this trend continues into the metaverse, you can see how much more explicit that will be.
Right.
If and in the metaverse, in the early days, I mean, much like the internet, it's almost unpoliceable.
Right.
So there will be quite a bit. I think we should be very cautious, not to the point where it stagnates progress, but
right.
It's something that we need to consider, because most likely, I mean, it will happen. If you take a look at what's going on in video games right now, so a lot of people,
sure.
Something before, like when I was a kid, you played the video game on your Atari at home by yourself, maybe with your brother or sister. Right. Now you're playing with people all around the world, coming from different backgrounds, and there's lots of swearing and cursing and calling each other out, on these group games. And so, are you all loving each other during the games? I don't think so. And so, again, if these sort of trends continue into the metaverse, how do we going to create a metaverse that is safe and fun and positive?
Right. Very much so. And I would imagine, let's say if you're using some sort of platform like a Decentraland or something similar in the metaverse, if let's say there's an avatar of myself, an avatar of yourself, and let's say for the most part it looks like myself and for the most part it looks like yourself, I do feel like if a third party, whether some act is inflicted upon me or you, it does feel, I would imagine, and I think it would, it's going to feel like as if it's actually happening. So to say. So let's say somebody humiliates, let's say my avatar or your avatar, something salacious, something totally false. There's really no effective way to undo the reputational damage from that. And as far as emotional damage, that's going to take a while to navigate. And it probably makes it even more harrowing if you really don't know who that third party is, or group of, or third parties, plural, so to say, because there's no recourse. I think for many, male or female, and everybody, and everything else in between, I think if at least something happens, you at least know the identity, so to say. There's at least some relief of that burden, knowing that you can get some recourse. Now, I'm not saying particularly, not calling it revenge or something like that, but there is some sort of resolution, having, more information. And now I guess in the metaverse, so to say, my likeness to your likeness in many ways is really subject to the whims of, let's say, bad parties or the decency of good parties. Hopefully everybody respects each other, but that's clearly not always going to be the case.
My only hope is that, so there's a lot of, there's some good technologies that, or I'd say advances in AI, where it can detect sentiment. So the hope is that, maybe some of those technologies sort of will have a sort of an overarching existence within the metaverse, say, where whenever it hears certain tone or certain words in combination, and it reads a sentiment that sounds hostile, that somehow that gets flagged, and maybe there's like a point system where if you mean to people, you lose points or something. Like there has to be something. Yeah, I can tell you this, we just can't trust human beings just to be respectful and nice to each other.
Right.
Like, it won't happen.
Sure. Yeah.
Because even, I've had not very many, but every now and again you get a negative comment on something that you wrote. It's like stab you in the heart.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
It doesn't feel good. And that's just words, never mind like an avatar in your face, like yelling at you or something.
Right. And let's say adding on top of that, robots and AI, let's say replacing those traditional functions in relationships, such as, sex and intimacy and emotional and physical, and let's say even spiritual needs, throwing that layer on top, are we facing a future where people are going to really be desensitized towards sex altogether, and in fact, may not even desire per se human interaction as much, in light of, let's say, the convenience of an AI, so to say, where you don't really have to, let's say, deal with the pitfalls of dealing with another human being, in a relationship. I kind of wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, this is the whole point of the academic conference, Love and Sex with Robots, to discuss the research and the implications of exactly this topic. It's of great concern to many people. What we know right now is that the technology is quite far off to be even considered replaceable of humans. Like it's just not there yet, and I don't think it'll be for quite some time. Nevertheless, I'm not sure that sex robots, like the ones that you really have like the great skin texture, the hair, and you can customize them to look however you want, male or female, etc. They still look like Barbie dolls and Ken dolls. I'm not convinced that those will replace humans per se. In the same way that dildos don't replace penises. There's still something better about humans for the most part.
Got it.
Having said that, there's all sorts of cohorts of people that currently don't have access to the relationships that they would like to have in their life for one reason or another. And so in as opposed to replacing human being, it's at least something. It's better than nothing kind of thing.
Sure.
So that aspect, I think, has a positive place for, let's just call them love robots, because the chances of you loving your robot and having sex with it, maybe those two will go together. But much like, sex workers, 80% of the time is talking. So it's,
I've read that too. Yeah.
It's the relationship that people are ultimately looking for. And if people are lonely and they don't have anyone, and they at least have an AI robot to talk to, that might save someone from, committing suicide or being like lonely to the point where they just, have nothing. We have been, especially now that, during COVID, we have been super acclimated to communicating and building relationships in a virtual world. And so, I'm doing this every day. I meet new people almost every single day. I've made tons of friends through around the world. Do I want to hang out with them in person? Yeah, I do. Will I take a Zoom call over nothing? Absolutely. Right. So I think this is kind of how we need to think about it. The concern, but there's a greater concern with how some people think that men might treat women if they have an opportunity to treat a sex doll or a sex robot in a violent way. There's concerns that if a man can have a sex robot and they can, abuse
it, harm it, whatever sick variation of those. Yeah.
It's not going to map on to how they treat women in person.
Right.
So that's a legit concern. There are people, actively researching that area. It could be possible. I'm not sure that one can say all men will do that. I would say that there might be a portion of men that might do that. But at the same time, if you think about people who take karate and martial arts, they take these classes, they're regularly super into it. Does that mean they're karate chopping, all their friends and family on the streets on a daily basis? No.
Of course not, yeah.
We have a capability to, compartmentalize certain things. If we're watching horror movies, does that mean we're going to go and start, murdering people?
Right.
But some people might get people get inspired, but for the most part, we can compartmentalize.
Yeah, and I have to say, sometimes whether it's sci-fi or cyberpunk movies, sometimes it seems like a foreshadowing of certain things. So ranging from flicks like Blade Runner or, The Fifth Element or, Johnny Mnemonic in Virtuosity, some of these aspects of, let's say, intimacy with AI or intimacy with like cyborgs, so to say, and robots, frequently comes up. So as far as relationships between two human beings, male and male, female and female, male and female, and everything else in between, will this change the definitions of, let's say, cheating, adultery, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, so to say? So let's say if a man is, let's say, satisfying his emotional and physical needs with, let's say, a sex robot, whereas, let's say, none of that energy or attention is going towards his wife. Is that going to lead to, let's say, a transformation or maybe even like a slippery slope when it comes to these things? Or is it going to make it easier for, let's say, people to do things like that? Like, let's say, cheat, or let's say, or anything else and everything else, in between.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. It can go a multitude of ways. So, different people have different things. And so, instead of having, say, your husband go out and have a real sexual relationship with a real human being, maybe some women might be like, well, at least go with your sex robot, because I know like that's just a robot and he's right there, and go do that. Maybe that's better than actual cheating. But then there will also be people who, and on both sides, right? There's male sex robots as well.
Right.
But then there's the other side where there's a threat, right? Like there are some women or some people that think even just chatting with someone, even on not talking sex, is cheating. Or thinking about cheating is cheating. So depending on where you sit on the spectrum of cheating, will determine whether you are, anti-sex robot or not. But, there's also the dynamic. There's a lot of men that are threatened by sex toys. So women would like to bring a sex toy, which basically is a robot. It moves.
Practically speaking, yeah.
And so men are threatened by that as well. Well, what do you need that? Well, am I not pleasing you? No. Sure. So all of these dynamics with technology and anything that's beyond just like the two people in the relationship, this is all happening, right? And then you start getting into polygamous relationships and intersex relationships and all sorts of things. And so it's all very complex. You really can't say much about one particular thing that's going to, do something to a whole community of people. So everything's on a spectrum, even this.
Right.
Yeah, so it could be a slippery slope for some and not for others, but even the dystopian, fears about robots are going to take over the world and whatever.
Right.
This is all, these are fear-based
Right.
decisions that people are making based on, not much evidence up to that point, other
Right.
than movies.
Yeah, absolutely. And movies are frequently, referred to when I read a lot of these articles. And also thinking of my childhood, I probably watched a good chunk of them as well. I just kind of thought it was awesome entertainment back then. So, when you mentioned, gender fluidity, people who are, let's say, have traits of both, and that's fluid, and that's on a spectrum. Now, I think probably for the first time in history, or at least modern history, gender fluidity and transgenderism is now really at the forefront in all the problems. And I think all the attempts of understanding that area. And I think also trying to make mainstream society become more welcoming and understanding. Where's the starting point, for that group or for those groups, so to say? Because, it seems to me a more complex, layered situation, whether it comes to sexual harassment, whether even if it comes to robots and things like that. So trying to, I guess my question would be, where would be the logical, starting point for, like, A, trying to get society acclimated and understanding, but B, for somebody who is, let's say, gender fluid, transgender, and by the way, that presents a unique set of issues. What would be some of the helpful information and advice to start navigating the world, navigating relationships between men and women too, depending on whatever orientation that person has?
Oh my God, that's a huge question. I really don't.
I
don't have the answer to that. Like, not even gonna pretend that I do. But I mean, right now, luckily, there's a lot of more than ever sex education resources.
Yes.
Out there where you can read, like Tickle Life, Please Me's a really welcoming platform, just as two examples where people can read about these different, whether you feel like you are falling under the spectrum of these sort of newly acknowledged identities,
Sure.
or you're someone who wants to learn more about them. Like, I don't know what a trans person is. What does that mean? How is that different from a hermaphrodite? How is that different from someone who is queer? How is that different from someone who's two-spirit? So if they want to understand what are all of those things, so that I just know it in my head, and then I feel like with that knowledge, then I can, be a better, respectful person if I understand better.
Right.
So there's that. I mean, getting away from this Christian Catholic, man, woman must be married, sex for procreation paradigm is key as a starting point. So we're getting there, but we're really far from it, because there's a lot of violence and aggression against transgendered folks, against the LGBTQ plus community still as a whole, but in specifically to transgendered folks. It's just so new. Well, it's not new to humans. It's new to being out. Humans have always been born with different combinations of things, and that, just historically they dealt with that differently and secretly and shamefully. And so the more that it's very hard to say, like, oh, well, everyone should just come out and declare. And then the more people know that there's more people out there, then, like, oh, wow, like half the world is actually fluid, therefore it's normal. But there's a risk involved right now because of the violence and aggression that people get, and the discrimination. So it's kind of like that cart before the horse. Like, how do you go first? What is the first thing? It should be this, but that has a risk. And so how do we do all of that? It's talking and having podcasts like this is
Yeah. And listen, I'll be the first to admit, I don't understand all of it per se, but I think to really have a better, I guess you could say, forward-leaning, progressive society that really maximizes everybody's potential abilities, you need to understand others, and you need to know how to capitalize and work with others who are different than you. Because, like I mentioned before, if you keep working with the same people and let's say you refuse to understand others, you end up in an echo chamber. Things become stagnant. And then you know what? You lose money, you lose jobs, you lose opportunities and things like that. And, the world is just so complicated. Nobody knows everything. I always keep this in mind to myself. Always act as if the other person knows something you don't. So, keeping that in mind, and also keeping in mind history, and I love history, but, as early as, let's say, the Greeks and the Romans, the Native Americans, and, many parts of society, even during the Renaissance, there were, let's say, hermaphrodites, transgender people who identified with both. And, there are historical records of this. And I'm talking about like Roman emperors, even, for instance, and perhaps even certain members of nobility in Western Europe as well. So, there is a history. There is a documented, well-written history of this. And I think, often, and this is unfortunate, but, I guess the lack of information does tend to breed violence. And we could see this throughout history. It creates stereotypes, it creates superstitions, it creates bullshit fears. And, this, let's say, this causes, let's say, anti-Semitism. It causes, let's say, anti-Catholicism, whether it's about the Irish or the Italians who are coming to the United States, 100 years ago or so. So, I think, like you said, having these conversations and talking about it, this is going to be really the first steps to kind of illuminate and kind of acclimate people to really at least start to attempt to, understand these areas. Because I don't think it serves anybody. If you're going to go out into the world and really have the expectation you are really just going to deal with people like you and people who believe in the same things as you, you're going to be shit out of luck. And, life is very complicated. Life is very nuanced. And, more often than not, life exists in those nuances instead of, I guess you could say, the broad categories, of things, whether, whether it's your religious background or ethnic background or, even your geographic background as well, let's say you can look at some of the bad things that came out during the Trump administration. As an American, I would hate for all people outside of this country to assume that all Americans think and believe like that. I would say this, in fact, it's quite the opposite. And more often than not, you're seeing the fringes in the press and in on the news and things like that. And I'll tell you this, being from the New York City area, I'll have to say, growing up as a kid, and this is anecdotal, but Donald Trump was always considered a joke, to be honest, almost like a cartoon character. So, I know this is a little bit off topic, but when I saw him, run for president, and I guess I guess from seeing some of the rhetoric, this looked like a very big step backwards, so to say. And this was inevitably going to cause problems. And even more so, this was the guy who got, business bankruptcy 5 or 6 times. In fact, he bankrupted his own casino business in Atlantic City. That's a separate story. But, things like that make people lean on their baser instincts. So it's kind of easier. When somebody in power is saying these things, it's easier to dislike or discriminate against, others. And conversations like this are, very, very illuminating. And to be honest, I think it's easier. It's not so easy to hate people up close and personal. Like, for instance, if you look at any of those people who go to those, for example, far right rallies, so to say, it's very easy for them to hate immigrants, so to say. You'll see it. You'll see the rhetoric. You'll see the comments. It exists in the U.S. You see also elements of that in Western Europe as well, with certain like far right factions that are coming up through politics. Up close in person, I feel like people have a harder time reaching that in their head, because then you get into a conversation with somebody and you realize, oh, I kind of like this person. We like the same things, so to say. So it kind of muddies the waters, and it's kind of like it provides exposure. And I think exposure really encourages friendship and partnerships and collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I always said about Trump that it really wasn't about Trump. Trump wasn't about Trump. Trump was a representation of a group in the U.S. that felt threatened by the rise of women, by the rise of the LGBT community, by the rise of the Black community. And it's a patriarchal reaction to what they consider a threat to their power. Let it be known, though, also, there are plenty of women that also hold a patriarchy
Sure.
because it benefits them. So it's not just like, blame all white men. There's plenty of people, plenty of women that also benefit from this model. But, also humans are complex, right? I'm not just a woman. I'm not just a woman who, does sex tech. I have like a million things that I do
that make you,
that make me, right? So that's why these personal interactions are so much different. If you're at a rally, a political rally, where you're talking about just politics,
right.
so then it's very easy to make an othering association. If you're conservative, what do they call it? I'm Democratic. I'm liberal.
Republican or Democrat. Yeah.
And we understand that, we collide on this, but once you get into a conversation with people, there's so much more to who humans are. Becomes very hard, like in person, like you said, to continue acting like that face to face.
Yeah, and I've always found that to be the case, both I think practically speaking, anecdotally speaking. It is harder to hate somebody in person, and it's harder to hate somebody to their face. And in the abstract, it's much easier to discriminate and dislike people. And unfortunately, I guess referencing Trump, he really unearthed a lot of problems that, let's say, for instance, there's been progress being made. I wouldn't call it amazing, but there's been steady progress being made, and he really took that 10 steps backwards, so to say, by kind of stoking the flames of maybe these personal feelings or insecurities, rather, as far as where society, was going. And just being from the Northeast and knowing what I knew about Trump as a kid, he was always a grifter. So like, he was, he was the guy coming out with gimmicky products and try to sell them in stores like Trump steaks. I mean, who the hell would buy Trump steaks? And, he came out with his own Thai line and Trump vodka and stuff like that. And, there was always the joke when I was a kid, and my grandparents said this, my parents like, how the hell do you bankrupt a casino? Because he had 2 casinos in Atlantic City. They were both across the street from each other. And I guess perhaps the team didn't think this through. His 2 businesses were competing against each other effectively. So it ended up being a loss. So everything that came out of this guy's mouth as a kid was always a lie. So it was always kind of a joke. He did like stupid movie cameos and show cameos. He was like Home Alone 2. So when I saw this stuff going on, I'm like, holy shit, people are really taking him seriously. And this was a guy who was a Democrat until yesterday, so to say.
Yeah, I don't think people took him seriously, though. I think he said stuff that he knew would appeal to a particular group, and that group was waiting for someone to say the stuff out loud that they've been wanting to say out loud for some time.
Right.
So they really were. It was more like they were believing in themselves more than they were believing.
Yeah, they were associated
for that.
So I guess in many ways, using the terms of the metaverse, he almost became an avatar for those type of grievances and feelings and insecurities, among people, so to say. And growing up here in the Northeast, I mean, everybody's mixed. Everybody comes from different backgrounds. There's nothing homogenous about my neck of the woods, whether it was growing up and up until now. So going to school with all different types of people and all different types of backgrounds never really crossed my mind, did it? Because these are people I hang out with. These are families that I have dinner with, and families that invite me over for celebrations. And in turn, I do the same thing. So seeing some of that stuff over the past few years, it was kind of it was really disheartening. I have to say, and I would like to think as America, we're better than that. I think that's at least the promise, the social contract, that we put out there. And kind of going off that, do you think the metaverse can bring people together? Or do you think that this could be used more for insidious purposes, whether it's, let's say, bigotry, whether it's for discrimination, whether it's for everything along those lines? Because I would like to think with the metaverse, maybe this might be an icebreaker for people from different areas to meet each other. If you're using a digital avatar, maybe it might make people feel more comfortable to do, those bridge building steps digitally before, let's say, building more of a friendship on top of that.
Well, Adam, normally I'm quite hopeful on these things, but in this case, I think the reality is human beings also have a spectrum of ideas and, behaviors. And
Right.
I don't think what went on in the US is anything that's particular to human behavior over time. If you look at
Right.
all of the wars and politics and everything over time, it's kind of a human reaction to certain things. And if you take, say, social media as an example, I remember going to this talk, the Dalai Lama came here, filled the stadium, had this great talk about all the great things that we can do with social media in order to move, humanity forward in positive ways. And he was right. And a lot of people have done that. But there's also people who use, social media for evil, like that Dynamics. Oh gosh, I forget her name. Boston, no, that's the robotic company. The ones who did the social media for Trump campaigning and
Oh, yeah, I know.
voters.
I know who you're talking
Cambridge
about.
Analytics. Cambridge Analytics.
You're right, Cambridge Analytics. Yeah.
So they, they use social media for bad. And, I mean, data right now is great in many ways. I mean, we can use data to make more informed decisions about a lot of important things, but then there's people who steal data and do nefarious things. So the point is that it will be both because
Right.
that's how we operate. So there will be, a great opportunity to create metaverse spaces
Right.
where, maybe we can have more truth and reconciliation activities, and where social movements can really go to the next level. You can go protest in a metaverse. I can't always, fly to New York to go protest, for sex worker rights, but I can do that in the metaverse, right? So there's opportunities there. Maybe the Arab crisis didn't need to happen, and like it had a lot of negative effects afterwards. Maybe in the metaverse, we can do more civil action in a way that doesn't, destroy countries and destroy lives. But there will be, without a doubt, nefarious activities. Like it's unavoidable.
Right. I would like to think that would bring the world together. And sometimes I think it begs the question, does social media reward the fringes? So, whether it was whatever happened, many things that happened, let's say during our last president, I really wonder, do the algorithms out there reward this type of behavior? And it could be from whatever fringe and whatever part of the spectrum, because that's what it seems to be like sometimes. I feel like if you want to be a voice of reason, you have to go to great lengths to speak over those other voices, let's say, who are the fringes, and they're getting the clicks, they're getting the likes and things like that. For me, it looks that way, at times, I'll have to admit.
I mean, it's a reflection of kind of what goes on in people's minds, right? So
yeah,
for the most part, a lot of us have a voice in our head that doesn't always say the greatest things to ourselves.
Sure.
And that's the starting point. And then we go on to complain about external, you did this, you did that, it's your fault, it's their fault, my life sucks because of you and that and whatever. And I think that takes up too much of our mind space, and then that just maps onto social media. So if you think about, say, ratings, right? People are more likely to write a negative review, say on a restaurant or something, than they are a positive one.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. There was some kind of activity a few years ago about, wear an elastic on your wrist, and every time you complain, snap it so that you get an idea of how many times a day do you complain about something. And so
wow.
So that's why it seems like there's so many more negative voices in there, because that's kind of how we're not that great yet about being positive all day long.
Yeah.
On top of that, the algorithms, they tend to favor activity, right? So the more you say and do the same thing, the more engagement you get, and it sort of builds on that. So because the algorithms are supposedly unbiased, it's sort of whatever is getting the most activity gets more activity. And that's just how they're built, because the idea is social media is not trying to give you a wide spectrum of information. They want to nail down the thing that's going to get you to stay on the platform every like minute by minute, right? So that's what algorithms are for. They're meant to keep you engaged. They're not meant to give you a spectrum of information.
Right. That's a very, very good point. And you mentioned sex workers before, and I feel it's a very interesting topic. And I think that's also a topic that doesn't get enough attention, at least particularly here in the United States now. Now, sex work, for the most part, is illegal with the exception of certain exceptions, such as, the municipalities or let's say counties in the US that do permit it. But there is a growing movement of sex workers attempting to get rights in the United States, attempting to form a union, attempting to acquire legal protections and legal recognitions under the law. And I don't see a problem with that. It makes perfect sense. If that's your profession, yes, you do need legislation that guards your rights. You do need recourse in the case of suits or something happens. How do you think the metaverse or AI or these other things we've been talking about can serve, let's say, sex workers?
Well, we could take OnlyFans as an example.
Sure.
So OnlyFans is, say, the stepping point towards the metaverse,
right?
And it was doing good in the sense that sex workers, especially during the pandemic, had actually somewhere to go and somewhere to conduct their work that was safe, where they were actually getting paid what they're at least worth, and having a bit more control of the schedule and the location, things like that. So it was good in that sense. And then of course, there's some lobby groups in the US that basically annoy all the digital platforms because they think everything that is sex trafficking, which is not true. Not to say that sex trafficking isn't important. It is an important topic to tackle, but you can only go so far in the metaverse, right? People still want human interaction.
Right.
So, there's lots that can be done. Or if you take, like, say, Holodex. So they are a VR porn company, and they their porn is extremely realistic. So realistic that they got kicked off one of those gaming platforms where you put your, I can't remember what is the platform name, but it's sort of where all the gamers put their game.
Where there's like Twitch, like that's like, is it
not Twitch? The other one.
Oh, is it Steam?
Anyways, the point is,
there's like 4 or 5 major ones, so I kind of have an idea which one you're.
So they got kicked off because they were so realistic and so just it was shocking how realistic. So they got kicked off that platform, hopefully temporarily. But that just to give you an idea of how far that's advancing. And once they sort of get to a certain point, then people become scared of it, right? So, we can't predict now what kind of laws they will put on the metaverse if they can. There's some degree of monitoring of the internet of sex activity, but not from the government. It's from activist groups who do more of the chasing around of that. But at the end of the day, the metaverse is a privileged technology that most sex workers won't have access to, certainly not street workers. And so, having a safe place to conduct their work in the metaverse is probably not all that accessible to most sex workers who need to be in the clubs. They need to be on the street.
Right. Well, and I guess, in order to make the metaverse work for them, that's probably going to have to start with legislation on, state level and eventually in Congress to maybe at least provide those legal protections or, some sort of recourse and, opportunities to have access to, resources, so to say. I think in that case, there is going to have to be government regulation to really facilitate and optimize the well-working of how that industry could potentially be, and I've always looked at it this way, especially because I love history, but throughout the course of history, prostitution wasn't the top list of taboos in a lot of societies. I know a lot of people make the joke, it's the oldest profession, but in other societies, in earlier, more ancient times, this wasn't something that, let's say, people would quote unquote lobby about, so to say. It wasn't perfect or anything like that. There's still violence and organized crime behind a lot of that, but you didn't see really, I guess you could say, the mass, like a zealous religious lobby trying to stymie any efforts for people doing sex work to really get rights and recognition, I have to say.
Yeah, it's kind of it's an artifact of the Industrial Revolution, when
I can see that.
The whole mandate was, we need to shut all that down. We need to make sure that people only have sex within, a heterosexual arrangement,
right?
Because it boiled down to capitalist productivity, right? And they thought, well, people are off, running around do this, then they will be working. And so that was the really, like, to keep people in line. They thought that they needed to do all of this, but yeah, I mean, you're right. Before that, it was. But if we have any hope of sort of bringing these sort of out from the underbelly and into some kind of legitimate situation, we only need to look at New Zealand, who was the first and only country that actually formed sex worker rights by actually asking sex workers themselves about what kind of rights they would like to have. Because, there's people up here making decisions about things for people down here over
and
here.
Often the people up here tend to be also the biggest patrons of that too, which is always the irony that I find. You hear stories about, well, not even just stories, but really exposés in Washington D.C. about certain politicians and senators and stuff like that. It's like very hypocritical that some of you guys would be against prostitution, considering what's been revealed about your personal lives.
Because it's not about what they really think; it's what they think you're going to get the vote, right?
Yeah.
So that's why politics is complicated, but there's really no reason to not make sex worker rights. There's only great reasons to make people more safe. I mean, if you really want to control something, give them worker rights, give them.
Yeah.
Access to, like, it's illogical if the idea is not to control people, but if that was your plan, you went about it in the wrong way, because then you have no control whatsoever.
Right. And I think further further criminalizing it as it is right now, this really does encourage the growth and strength of, let's say, organized crime. And organized crime is concerned in any country. Regardless of whether, let's say, it's the Italian mafia or whoever else that comes to mind. So I would like to think that, at least, protecting it, protecting the rights, providing a union, that actually does decrease crime in of itself, and perhaps even increases, literacy, and even increases, I guess you could say, life expectancy as well, especially. I mean, sex workers also have families. Sex workers also have people that depend on them and rely on them as well. This doesn't exist in, let's say, a film noir or, gritty thriller movie type of vacuum where you see, I guess you could say, the lone streetwalker, so to say. These are people with families and lives and people who count on them as, as well. So, kind of going back to, life existing in the grays and the nuances, I think more often than not, that's what it, that's often what it is. But anyway, moving off of that, seeing that you also work in, venture capital at, Tandem Launch, and, you also have your own business at Imagine Ideation. What projects, what interesting things are you working on?
Well, Tandem Launch, we build deep tech companies. And we've been doing that for around 10 years, not me, but the company itself. So when we build out those companies, kind of separate inventor from invention. So we acquire university IP, we look for entrepreneurs, put them together, build companies around that, and then spin them out one after the other. So it's a really interesting model for people who, oh God, I always wanted to start my own tech company, but I don't have this amazing idea. Oh, come to Tandem Launch, and then we've got the ideas there. So, but I try to help some of the companies fundraise for venture capital. I'm also the host of the podcast, the launch, and fun things like that.
Awesome.
For Imagine Ideation, we basically help take the like sort of the entrepreneurial startup model and map that onto social enterprise, charities, and nonprofits. So we help them sort of scale their business. Maybe they need to find money, they need some help, you know, guidance on operations, marketing, strategy, communications, all of that. So whatever it is that they need, we have all of the resources available to help them grow and sort of get to the next level. And the ecosystem diplomacy thing, this is really one of the things that we do when we're doing events and connected experiences, where just understanding, so, you know, we do that for Love and Sex with Robots as well. It's not just about the academic community, but how do you connect the academic community with the engineers who are actually working on the products, the industry folks, end users. So end users of sex dolls and sex robots, what do they think? So when you bring everybody in the room together, all the stakeholders, oftentimes they don't talk. And so we want to facilitate those conversations so that you have more enriched knowledge, you have a broader spectrum. And we apply this model to all sorts of other events that we've done with science, neuroscience, we've done it with cultural communities and things like that. So it's sort of like awesome. Having so much experience in many different areas. Like I can speak finance, like finance has a specific terminologies and talk that, you know, academics or marketing folks don't necessarily like, I don't get what you're talking about. And why is that so important to you? So if people want to move projects forward, so you have to get everybody around the table that's part of the ecosystem, because they all need to interact, but in a way that is productive. And that's what we help people do.
That's awesome. So from the venture capital perspective, if a startup wants to pitch an idea to you in the company, what do you look for in a startup as far as their team, their idea, and maybe, or whether it's their white paper or pitch deck? What are some of the attributes and traits that you look for and you think, okay, they may be onto something?
Okay. So, well, just as a caveat, Tandem Launch does not fund other people's startups. We only build them in-house, but I still get pitched all the time. And I do invest in things myself every now and again. So yeah, you're definitely looking for a team dynamic. That's super important.
Sure.
Solo entrepreneurs, not so much. You want to make sure that there's a team there. They're more risky solo entrepreneurs because if they go, the company goes.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that. I mean, you want to have, it's hard to like give you like a one-liner about what makes a good idea, but they have to have
some things that have come to mind, you know, anything.
Decent idea about something, but I mean, a great entrepreneur can take a shitty idea and make it magic. And
that's
so
good to know too.
You can tell by their pitch deck how much homework they've done. Did you really do a proper market validation? You don't have to do a 20-page market study to understand your market. When someone pitches an AI company to me, they're like, the AI market is going to be $4 trillion by 2024. I'm like, okay, but you're not telling me like what specific slice of that market you're going to enter. Because you're not going to enter the whole $1 billion market. You know, there's slices, right? Submarkets. And so when people haven't done that, then I know right away, you're not doing your homework and you don't want to, because you don't want to discover that your idea is bad. I want someone to know that there's limitations, there's restrictions, there's constraints, acknowledge them, tell me how you're going to overcome them. And by doing that, then I get an idea that they're not just like, you know, blinders on, like my idea is the best and I'm just going to pitch it. It's going to be great. People are going to love it. No, like what are the shitty things that are going to happen? What are the risk factors? And that is not conveyed just by telling me who is your competition.
It's definitely a lack of ego and the ability to have some thick skin and, you know, self-reflection to go a long way. You know, I've certainly met other entrepreneurs where apparently, you know, their ideas just seem infallible. You can't really say anything about it. And, you know, just from personal experience, those are some of the ones that I've seen fail relatively quickly. You know, I think you need to be able, if you really believe in your idea, you also have to have the strength to look at it fairly too. You need to be able to take that in stride and with grace, be like, yeah, you know what, this part is shit. This part is not working. You know what? we can figure out something for this, or we can change something fundamental about the project where maybe we can leverage benefits in a different direction or its functionality in a different direction versus where we're going, right now. But anyway,
Yeah.
I wanted to also, ask you as far as sex and robots. And I know I'm going back to this topic, and I want to make the comparison to online dating because I remember back in the 90s, if you mentioned online dating, everybody thought it was for weirdos, so to say.
Yeah.
It was for perverts. It was for weirdos. It was for, sexual predators. Like all these, let's say, stigmas came out about it. You fast forward barely 10 years, let's say if you're looking at 2005, 2006 and beyond, everybody's using it. So will sex robots take the same trajectory? Because I'm sure if I went out on the street, even here in New York, if I was to talk about sex robots on 42nd Street, people are like, what the hell? Like sex robots? Like, oh, that's weird. And, maybe one or two people like, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd probably consider it. You'll find like a few people who readily admit it. But I think for the most part, people will still be prude about it, so to say.
No, it will definitely become normal because you can see, so it started with companion robots, right? So now we have robotic pets. Right. And there's a whole swarm of people working on companion robots or service robots. So say you enter the movie theater, you are greeted by a AI hologram, or you are greeted by a robot host who says, welcome. And if your ticket's over here, and you can go up and ask them, where's the bathroom? They'll point you in the direction, kind of thing. So service robots and companion robots will become ubiquitous shortly, 5 to 10 years. Almost everyone has some kind of something. I mean, a Roomba is the start, right? So the smart home so all of it, it's going to happen. And definitely sex robots will be acceptable in future iterations. That doesn't mean everyone will have one. What it means is that it won't be such a taboo thing. It'd be like, that person, just like, I don't know, Porsches or Ferraris or whatever, because they're quite expensive, right? So you sort of also have to be have the ability to buy one and maintain it, and so that requires a certain level of income. But so Porsches, Lamborghinis, and sports cars and whatever. Not everybody has one, but they're definitely around, and people do. And it's fine. So I think it'll be, you look at it like that proportionally. Yeah. So it's just like, before we could do this before COVID.
Right.
We just didn't.
Yeah.
It was there. But now it's daily. So yeah, it's inevitable.
That's well said. And on a final note, what advice would you give to current or aspiring entrepreneurs out there? And, and I'll emphasize this point. I think the space that you're in and what you're doing in the advocacy, that is pretty ballsy. And by the way, I kind of mean that tongue in cheek, but that's very gutsy, rather, to do that. And especially because, let's be honest, a lot of the traditional and, you could even say puritanical views of genders still exist. So you're coming out, let's say, as a woman doing tech, sex and robotics, advocacy, so to say. I could imagine throughout that process, you've probably met many detractors, many haters, and maybe even well-meaning friends who probably try to maybe talk you out of maybe some of the things you try to embark on. Never?
Nope.
Oh.
Never.
That's awesome.
Well, I'm a different kind of person. Like I say things with some kind of level of confidence that seems to be convincing to people. I don't know. But it's when I do talk to people that I don't know, and it comes up because it always does, because it's on my profile. They're like, oh, at first they're a little bit apprehensive, but then I explain to them what we're trying to do. And then they're fully on board. So it just takes a small, but nobody's ever been like, you should be doing that. And that's no, but I guess I don't run in those circles and those kinds of people. But no, I've only received intrigue. People are intrigued, unsure, maybe. But definitely I've not received any negative responses, or not yet anyways. I know some people who do, they get, nasty emails and you're free.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I know that exists. Also, some people get, dick pics and all sorts of other kind of solicitations.
Right.
I don't get any of that either. So I don't know.
Wow,
I don't
that's
put up with
good.
shit. Maybe people figure that out pretty quick.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what advice would you give to anybody starting out? Let's say even trying to go into the sex tech, direction as well, because let's face it, this is going to be a part of our society, and this is regardless of whatever religious or you could say patriarchal or stuffy lobby has to say about it. This is sticking around. This is going to be part of blockchain, the metaverse, the decentralized world, so to say. So on one hand, there is promise, but on the other hand, there's still kind of these obstacles and legacy systems that still exist, so to say.
I would say, be bold and go for it. If anybody wants to talk it through, hit me up. We can have a chat about it. But the potential, the industry is growing like hand over fist, pun intended. It's really, really remarkable what's happening in the industry. And if anybody wants to get in the early days before it is, explodes and it's like, oh, everybody's doing it now, it's too late. Get in now. Now is the time to do it. The more people that do it, and then it has a positive feedback loop, right? So
right.
The more people do it, then the more people that do it, and then the more money and more sales, and it grows, and then this is how we will be breaking down the taboos around it, especially in sexual health, sexual wellness, sex education.
Sure.
These are how we refer to things now in sex tech. Right. So it's already, the language is changing already. Wow. And as generations, like us get up to, positions of, decision making or influential positions, this will all change as well.
Right.
So this is changing where we are becoming more open, more welcoming. And it's just it's almost a no-brainer at this point.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this, I may have to take you up on that. I am always open to promising ideas, things that are earth-shattering, things that go against the grain, because often that is really where great things are born from. It's not really doing the same thing over again. And it's almost never, great things are almost never achieved by sticking with the safe option, sticking with essentially what everybody else is doing. So I think if you really want to, take a sledgehammer and make a real big bang, have an open mind, take risks, and be, like you said, be bold. That's really where kind of the true meaningful success is, so to say. If you want to be, let's say that, self-employed, independently wealthy, even, or just independent, or just free, let's say, from the traditional 9-to-5 grind, perhaps, open your mind to other projects and other roles that are out there and things you could probably do with those projects. So, I know a little bit as far as, literature out there with sex tech and AI, and, it is going to be around. I mean, even if you were to look at the standard figures for the revenues pornography brings in, each year, each month, each quarter, even, you could say, this could have the GDP larger than a lot of countries even, so to say. And I would only imagine that, let's say, sex robots, not to use a crude term, but let's say for this instance, sex robots is only going to amplify that. And, even beyond, let's say, as you mentioned, the sexual portion, it's going to be satisfying those, deficits, such as loneliness, so to say, or, you could say maybe a hot and fiery, passionate romance. Some people prefer that. So, these are going to this may actually end up being a new revolution for the pornography and sex worker, and hopefully the sex worker industries, when rights and legal protections come in. But for the pornography industry, or, the sex industry, broadly speaking, this could really put it in overdrive, really put it in sixth gear on the racetrack.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're all hoping, to get everything moving in positive direction that's not oppressive to women and groups, that's promoting, positive sex values, and making a buttload of money at the same time.
Well, I know I said on an ending note, but you mentioned sex values. Perhaps over the next few years, maybe that's something that's going to be, defined as well, so to say. Because I think when there's not so much repression or suppression of that, I think it does create a better society. I mean, you can look at maybe statistics in Holland and other parts of Western Europe where, those countries, have decriminalized and legalized things like prostitution and are a bit more freer about that. You see, there's not, the numbers as far as deviancy or even sexual related crimes, it is lower, and I know, there's differences in population and stuff like that, but it seems like, it may end up being a better benefit for society than a drawback. But anyway, I have to say, Bobbi, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. We covered a lot of ground. I feel like we covered almost everything under the sun.
I can talk all day about this. This is my favorite topic.
Well, I'll tell you what, in 2022, I'd love to have you to come back onto the show, perhaps in springtime, and perhaps we can pick up, from this conversation, because, 2022 is probably going to bring in a lot more developments and information and data regarding this industry. And I think people should know about it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm game.
Awesome. Bobbi, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Adam.
All right. Enjoy the holidays. Have a happy new year, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, you too. Bye for now.
Bye.